She walked into the lecture hall wearing a plain gray cardigan, just a simple woman quietly taking a seat in the back row. No one knew her name. No one cared to ask. To them, she was invisible, a custodian, someone who didn't belong among scholars and professors. But when she raised her hand to question the most respected mathematician in the room, the laughter started. They thought they were witnessing a joke. What they didn't know was that this woman, Emma, had spent years solving equations in silence, long after midnight, after her daughter fell asleep, after mopping university floors. And today, she was about to change everything. This is not just a story about mathematics. It's a story about resilience, hidden brilliance, and what happens when someone finally gets the chance to be seen. So stay with me, because by the end, you'll never look at a simple woman the same way again. Part 1: The Woman No One Saw Coming. Emma sat quietly in the back of the grand lecture hall at Texas State University. Her gray cardigan blending into the concrete walls. Her notebook resting gently in her lap. At 41, she didn't look like the rest of the room. No laptop. No designer bag. No youthful confidence. Just a simple woman with worn sneakers and calloused hands from years of cleaning floors. She worked nights in facilities management, and no one ever asked why she showed up to lectures like this on her own time. Professor Richard Harrington, silver-haired and sharp-tongued, stood at the front of the room like a general before battle. Today, he announced, we tackle the boundary constraints of Riemann's hypothesis in quantum computing theory. The room hushed. Students scribbled. Emma's pencil moved with quiet precision. She wasn't supposed to be there. Not really. Not in their eyes. 2 grad students leaned in behind her, whispering, "Who's that? The cleaning lady?" Must have wandered in looking for the lost and found. Emma kept her eyes on the board. She'd heard worse. What they didn't know, what no one ever asked, was that Emma had once been a scholarship student. That she'd been accepted into a top-tier university before her world fell apart. That her husband had walked out when their daughter was 3, leaving her with nothing but bills and a child to raise. That she'd traded dreams for diapers and textbooks for late-night shifts. But the numbers never left her. Equations still danced in her head while she scrubbed floors at midnight. Then Professor Harrington posed a question. A complex variable substitution that made the room go still. "Any thoughts?" he asked. Already dismissive. Emma's hand rose, slowly. Almost against her will. The room twisted. Heads turned. Harrington's smile curled like a hook. "Yes," he said, his tone dripping with amusement. "You have a thought?" Emma cleared her throat. "I believe the boundary condition collapses under your step 4 transformation." "Sir." Silence. Harrington arched an eyebrow. "And you are?" "Emma, I work in facilities." A ripple of laughter. "Oh," Harrington said, "how quaint." Her cheeks flushed, but she didn't lower her eyes. He turned back to the board and handed her the chalk. "Then, by all means, Ms. Facilities, show us." It was meant to humiliate her. But what happened next would silence everyone. Emma rose from her seat. Her steps were slow, deliberate. She took the chalk, not with arrogance, but calm assurance, and faced the equation. Her hand hovered for a moment, then began to move, line by line. She worked, confident, clean, no wasted motion. The whispers died. Harrington leaned forward, and when she finished, the problem was solved. Not just correctly, but elegantly. Not bad for a simple woman in a gray cardigan. And this was only the beginning. Part 2: The Chalkboard Challenge. Emma sat in the back of the lecture hall, her hands folded tightly around a well-worn notebook. The echo of laughter still lingered in the air from moments earlier, laughter directed at her. She hadn't meant to raise her hand, hadn't meant to speak, but the flaw in Professor Harrington's equation had caught her attention, like a crooked painting begging to be straightened. Now, he was calling her bluff. "Come forward," he had said, loud enough for every graduate student, faculty member, and guest to hear. His voice wasn't just a summons, it was a test, a dare, and a dismissal all rolled into one. Emma's footsteps felt heavier than her shoes as she walked down the aisle. It reminded her of another hallway years ago, pushing a mop bucket while humming math formulas under her breath to keep her mind sharp. Back then, no one asked what she knew. They just handed her a cleaning schedule. Now she stood in front of one of the most respected mathematicians in the country. With a piece of chalk in her hand, staring at a differential equation designed to humiliate her. Professor Harrington leaned against the lectern, arms folded, a smirk tugging at the edge of his mouth. "We're all eager to learn from your perspective," he said. Emma heard the chuckles ripple through the room. But as she looked at the board, something shifted. Her nerves didn't vanish, but they quieted, replaced by a familiar hum. The equation wasn't foreign. She knew this pattern. She'd studied it late at night, sitting at her kitchen table with her daughter doing homework beside her. While the rest of the world thought she was scrubbing floors, she was scribbling derivatives in the margins of old utility bills. She began to write, slowly at first, then faster. Symbols flowed across the board like a river finally breaking through a dam. The room fell silent, not out of respect, but confusion. Was she actually solving it? A student leaned toward his neighbor. "She's not supposed to know this stuff." Professor Harrington's smile vanished. Emma reached the last line and paused. The final step was clear as day in her mind, something she'd visualized countless times before. With one final stroke, she boxed the solution and stepped back. Harrington moved closer, squinting at her work. Then, with a tight jaw, he muttered, "That's correct." Gasps filled the room. Dr. Chen, a visiting professor from MIT, stood up. "She's not just right," she said. "She's brilliant." Emma felt the weight of 1,000 invisible days lift slightly from her shoulders. She hadn't just answered a question. She'd stepped into the light. And folks, if you're still with me, if you're still listening to Emma's journey, speech balloon, go ahead and comment 1 below to let me know you're here with us. Because what happens next, you won't want to miss it. Part 3: The Chalkboard and the Turning Point. The atmosphere in the lecture hall at Texas State had shifted. What started as an academic gathering laced with quiet arrogance had become something far more personal, something no one could have expected. Emma stood frozen at the front of the room, chalk in hand, as dozens of eyes bore into her. Just minutes ago, she dared to question a renowned professor's equation, a move that should have led to swift humiliation. Instead, she'd solved the problem cleanly, accurately, elegantly. But Professor Harrington wasn't ready to concede. With a stiff upper lip and a sharp voice, he declared, "Let's raise the stakes, shall we?" Then, with a smirk, he scrawled a new problem across the board, far more complex. Something even doctoral students might hesitate to touch. It wasn't just difficult, it was from his latest research on quantum encryption, a realm few dared enter without years of study. Emma stared at the wall of symbols. The room grew quiet, save for the hum of an overhead projector and the occasional creak of a shifting chair. Doubt whispered in her mind. Was this the moment she'd falter? Was she foolish to step out of her comfort zone? In the back row, a young student whispered, "She's going to walk away." No one could solve that. But Emma didn't walk away. She took a deep breath, one of those long, grounding breaths you take when everything feels bigger than you, and turned back to the board. Her mind reached back to nights spent in the quiet of the university library after her cleaning shift. Poring over mathematics journals, she thought about the time she'd read an obscure paper on transformation methods during a lunch break. Huddled over a sandwich and a borrowed textbook, she thought about her daughter, Lily, who believed her mom could solve anything. Slowly, methodically, Emma began to write. The audience leaned forward, caught in the quiet rhythm of chalk against board. At first, her solution seemed strange, her approach unlike the standard methods, but then the pieces began to fall into place. Her transformation simplified the problem in ways even seasoned faculty hadn't considered. From the front row, Dr. Elizabeth Chen of MIT leaned in, eyes narrowing with astonishment. "That's not just correct," she murmured to her colleague. "That's innovative." Even Harrington's smug expression faded as he watched Emma work. The equations forming a path only she seemed able to see. She wasn't rushing, but she wasn't hesitating either. She was in her element. You see, math wasn't something Emma studied in a classroom, it was something she lived. Numbers were her constant companions through years of hardship and heartbreak. They didn't judge her for wearing a janitor's badge or raising a child alone. They simply revealed truth, and now, that truth was unfolding in real time. When she finished, she stepped back from the board and set the chalk down. Silence followed, thick, reverent. A student in the third row whispered, "That was beautiful." Harrington, red-faced and visibly shaken, examined her work closely. His jaw tightened, but he couldn't find a flaw. Dr. Chen stood up and addressed the room. Ladies and gentlemen, this is mathematics history. I've seen that method discussed in draft papers, but never applied so gracefully. She turned to Emma. Where did you learn this? Emma, still breathless, replied simply, I taught myself. For a full minute, no one moved. Then, slowly, the lecture hall erupted in applause, not polite, but heartfelt. Even the students who'd laughed at her earlier now clapped with wide-eyed awe. Someone shouted, Bravo! Another called out, Encore! Though there was no music, just equations. Emma's eyes shimmered as she looked over the crowd. She wasn't a ghost anymore. She wasn't the woman with the mop and the quiet demeanor. She was Emma Mitchell, a mathematician, a mother, and a woman who had just proven that genius doesn't always wear a lab coat or carry a PhD. Part 4. When the room finally saw her, Emma stood at the chalkboard, hands dusted in white, her breath slowing after what felt like a lifetime compressed into 15 minutes of mathematics. The lecture hall had fallen into a stunned hush. Not a cough, not a whisper, just the kind of silence that says, we've witnessed something we weren't ready for. Dr. Richard Harrington, the man who moments earlier had tried to humiliate her, was frozen. His face, usually full of academic bravado, was unreadable. But his eyes? They betrayed it all. Disbelief. Then resistance, and finally, reluctant respect. From the front row, Dr. Elizabeth Chen stood up slowly. Her voice, when it broke the silence, carried like a bell. That wasn't just correct. That was a breakthrough. The students looked from the chalkboard to Emma, their previous smirks now replaced by awe. Phones that once captured her walk of shame now filmed something else, something historic. Emma stepped back, feeling the weight of years slip from her shoulders. She was still in her faded cardigan and slacks, still had her facility badge clipped to her hip, but everything had changed. Dr. Chen turned to the audience. What you just saw wasn't improvisation. It was a rare, intuitive grasp of dimensional analysis applied to quantum encryption models. She did in minutes what most of us couldn't do in months. A young engineering student in the third row blurted, Why isn't she teaching here? That question seemed to hang in the air like a challenge. And suddenly, Professor Harrington had to answer it. She doesn't have formal credentials, he said, though it sounded weak even to his own ears. But she has insight. Dr. Chen snapped back, and brilliance, which last I checked, doesn't require a degree to exist. Emma stood quietly through it all, her heart pounding with the rhythm of the life she'd almost hidden forever. She thought of her daughter Lily, who had gone to bed so many nights without knowing just how smart her mother really was. She thought of all the times she'd bitten her tongue instead of speaking up, choosing to blend in so she wouldn't be laughed at. Not anymore. Jason, one of the younger graduate assistants, walked up to her in front of everyone and handed her a small notebook. I've seen your notes before. Left behind on a bench in the staff lounge. I read them. You've been solving problems quietly for years. Emma looked at him, a bit stunned. She had never imagined anyone had noticed. Then, something even more surprising happened. Dr. Chen stepped forward again and faced the department head directly. I propose that Emma Mitchell be offered an honorary position as a guest lecturer in our advanced mathematics program, and that the university considers a research fellowship. The room erupted in murmurs of approval. Several professors nodded. Even Harrington, stone-faced and slow to change, finally gave the faintest of nods. Emma's throat tightened. I don't know what to say, she said quietly. Just say yes, Dr. Chen said with a kind smile. We'll handle the rest. Emma blinked back tears. This wasn't just recognition, it was redemption. It was every lost opportunity being pulled back into the light. And for once, she didn't feel like she had to justify it. She belonged. As the students filed out, many stopping to shake her hand or offer a word of gratitude, Emma sat down quietly at a bench near the entrance. Still absorbing the moment, she looked at the chalkboard one last time, at her own handwriting etched across it like a silent anthem. No one would erase this too quickly. No one would forget, and neither would she. If you're still following this story with me, if you felt something shift when Emma stood at that board and proved her worth in the quietest, strongest way, speech balloon comment 2 below and let me know you're still here. Because what comes next is when the world finally starts listening to the voices it once ignored. Part 5: A Legacy Finds Its Voice. The weeks that followed Emma's performance felt like something out of a dream, not because everything changed overnight, but because, at last, something had changed inside her. The maintenance badge she used to wear every day now rested inside a memory box on her kitchen shelf. In its place, she wore a name tag that simply read, Instructor, Guest Lecturer. Applied Mathematics. Emma still walked the same halls at Texas State University, but now students stopped her to ask questions, not just to avoid her cleaning cart. She'd been given a small office, windowless, tucked in the back of the math wing, but to her, it felt like a cathedral. Inside, she kept her chalkboard clear, ready for ideas. Her daughter, Lily, had helped decorate it with a small potted plant and a photo of Emma's old study table back home, stacked with notebooks and empty coffee mugs. A reminder of how far she'd come. Word of her extraordinary symposium performance had spread beyond campus. The video, originally captured on a student's phone, had gone viral. No flashy editing, no narration, just the sound of chalk on board and a quiet woman rewriting expectations with every stroke. A few days later, the university's board of trustees invited her to speak, not just as an honorary guest, but as a featured presenter at the annual Founders Lecture. She stood behind the podium in that same lecture hall, her voice calm as she recounted her journey, not as a genius, but as a mother, a worker, a woman who had spent years believing her mind didn't count because her uniform said otherwise. "I'm not here to tell you I'm special," she told the crowd, her eyes meeting the front row where her daughter now sat proudly. "I'm here to remind you that brilliance doesn't always come wrapped in credentials. Sometimes it comes wrapped in cleaning gloves and quiet nights of study after work." The applause that followed wasn't explosive. It was something deeper, respectful, thoughtful, like her story had reminded everyone of something they'd forgotten. 1 week later, Emma received an email from the National Science Foundation, a formal invitation to join a think tank on quantum encryption, not as a guest, as a peer. And just when she thought her heart couldn't hold more, another message arrived, from a small rural high school in New Mexico. A math teacher had shared Emma's story with her students. One of the girls, Elena, age 15, had written, "Miss Emma, I thought math wasn't for girls like me, but then I saw your chalkboard video. Now I stay after school and solve problems just to feel the way you looked when you held that chalk. Thank you." Emma read it twice, then a third time. She printed it out and pinned it above her desk. Because in the end, it wasn't just about equations or theories. It was about passing the torch. The following spring, she launched a new mentorship initiative, Quiet Minds, Bright Futures. Its goal? To identify hidden talent among custodial staff, cafeteria workers, and non-traditional students, people whose gifts had gone unnoticed. Just like hers had, she didn't just teach math now. She taught courage. And on the last day of that semester, as she walked across the quad, a student ran up to her breathless. "Miss Emma, I got into the program. The one you helped me apply for." Emma smiled, placing a gentle hand on the girl's shoulder. "I never doubted you." As the sun dipped low over the campus buildings, Emma paused outside the lecture hall. The same hall where everything had begun, where humiliation had given way to revelation. She stared at the steps, remembering how her legs had shaken that day. Now they felt steady, strong, because she knew something every person in that room had learned that afternoon. Truth doesn't need to shout to be heard. And sometimes, the quietest voice leaves the loudest echo. Closing reflection. A quiet lesson that speaks loudly. Emma's story reminds us of something many forget in a world that's often too loud, too rushed, and too quick to judge. Dignity doesn't come from titles. And brilliance doesn't need permission to shine. Sometimes, the most extraordinary minds live quietly among us, folding laundry, caring for loved ones, sweeping halls, holding dreams not lost, but patiently waiting. At 37, Emma wasn't chasing fame. She wasn't trying to prove anything. She was simply trying to keep her life together, like so many of us have. And yet, when the moment came, when the world suddenly looked her way, she didn't just rise, she soared. The lesson? It's never too late, not to learn, not to contribute, and not to be seen. If you've ever been underestimated, or told you were too old, too quiet, or not the right kind of smart, remember Emma. She didn't have a PhD or fancy degrees. What she had was a lifetime of quiet perseverance and a mind that never stopped working. So ask yourself, what dreams have I set aside that still matter? What truths do I carry that deserve the light of day? Because your story isn't over. And your voice? It still matters, perhaps now more than ever. If Emma's journey reminded you of your own strength, or someone you love who's walked a similar path, please take a moment to connect. Speech balloon comment below with, still standing, if you believe it's never too late to be recognized. Pushpin share your story in the comments. You never know who you might inspire. And if stories like Emma's stir something deep inside, right finger hit the like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss the next quiet hero who's ready to shine. Because here on BN Story, we believe the greatest legacies are built not on noise, but on grace, grit, and the courage to stand tall, quietly.